All right. Perfect. So, yeah, her sheets that are filled in are extremely helpful and they're typically updated very quickly. So, since you haven't done a purchase agreement yet, this will be a perfect time for us to go over it. Let's get right into it, starting with the agreement, the date the offer is written. This does not become your ratified date. This is just the date that you are getting it signed and turning it over to the listing side. We're going to do full legal name for your buyers. It's a really good idea, depending on the relationship with your buyers, to get their ID, but somehow, some way, make sure that you have their full legal name. There's plenty of times you might get halfway through a transaction and it's not their legal name, or they have some different names they use for different things. That can be fixed with an addendum, but just to get ahead of it, let's make sure we're starting with full legal names, initials, etc. We're going to look at the realist tax report for the full legal names of the sellers. If it does look like there's a difference in the tax report in realist versus what is on the MLS, just give the listing agent a call to clarify the why. There might be supporting documents needed. We're going to place our firm's full name as well as the listing firm's full name, and then, of course, both MLS office numbers. Coming down to agreement, you're going to use the address shown in realist, which is the legal address. That is not the tax ID or parcel number, but midway through the MLS listing, you'll see the legal description. It's usually numbers as well as block something. If you ever have any questions about where that is and you're writing up an offer, reach out to somebody immediately. And then you're also going to place down here the full address. Coming down to the deposit. If this is the first time that you're writing an offer for a client, or you maybe in the past you've made some offers but none of them have been accepted, they probably don't have money sitting with our title company or settlement attorneys. So here you would click the deposit shall be paid. Oh, my apologies. I just realized this was rewritten. So here it doesn't actually give you that option of whether or not they're already holding it. I'm sorry, it does below. My apologies. I need more coffee this morning. So we're going to fill out the amount that they are offering, both numerically and written, and then click on whether or not it's a personal check, federal wire transfer, certified bank check, automated clearinghouse, otherwise known as ACH, or other, which is can be an electronic check as well. If you're not sure and you haven't worked that through yet with the title company and your client, you can click multiple options here. Never be afraid to do that, because they can't accept a method of payment that's not clicked here. So go ahead and put that in. And then our escrow agent is always, if you're using Jones Walker and Lake, that's what you would put in here. And then this was the part where you will say the second option will pay if they have not made an offer yet on a property. Typically, if a client already has made an offer on a property and has paid the EMD, but it fell through, they have the option to leave that money with the escrow agent with Jones Walker and Lake. That's not a bad idea, because it can take a couple days to get that money back. So as long as they're still looking, they can leave it with them, and you would click the first option, has paid. And then we're going to come down to the purchase price, and this is where you're going to fill it out numerically and written. You want to be very careful here as you're negotiating back and forth as these numbers change. You have to make sure that you're changing every single one of these. Good morning. We have some more people joining us. So as I was saying, as you negotiate back and forth, make sure that you are changing these numbers every time. 4 different places. Actually, there's 5 different places. There's one more farther down on the contract. But for the 4 listed right here, you're going to get into a situation sometimes where you want to use small font if you think there's going to be a lot of negotiations back and forth, because you will easily run out of space. But filling in here the down payment amount and the full loan amount and the loan type listed here. You don't have to list where the loan is coming from, just the loan type, and these are your 3 options. Do nothing with this ratification box until all parties have signed off and agreed, and that's where this gets signed. That becomes the ratification date. Moving forward on all documents pertaining to this transaction, right at the top of every amendment, every document, it's going to ask you for the date. This is the date that you're going to be looking for, not the date at the top of this page. And then initials. Coming to settlement expenses, this is where we're going to ask for contribution towards our buyer's closing costs. The verbiage that's listed here, I have a tendency to copy and paste. It's written really well and it covers any and all things outside the box that anyone could think of, specifically for the debt reduction at buyer's sole discretion and approved by lender. That approved by lender is really important. Coming down, we don't have any changes here. For loan application, you're going to place the name of the lending company, the name of the lender. I like to put their direct phone number. You can put more than just one lender because you do have these 7 days to finish applying for your financing. If you have a buyer who's like dead set on using, say, a national bank or Navy Fed or Veterans United, but they are interested in getting pre-approved with a local lender of your recommendation, make sure that you just have all that information here. Initials. I'm going to come down to intent to occupy. For investment property purposes, this is where we would mark does not intend to occupy. That does affect the loan type, but for the most part, we're looking at intends to occupy. Initials. Exceptions. This is where if you have any type of third-party issues that will have to give court approval, short sale, bankruptcy, divorce, we're seeing that a lot. They have to be listed in the disclosure section of the listing on the MLS, as well as putting that in the agent remarks. And when you're filling out a listing data form, when you're on the other side, you will see there where the disclosure section has where you mark everything. Whether or not we're on a septic system is marked here, whether or not it needs a waiver. Coming down to possession. If you don't fill this out, the amount of days, it does default to 10. So you talk to your buyer about what best works for them as far as settlement dates. I will tell you that most title companies will recommend not doing it on a Monday or a Friday, just because if things get pushed out, that could change a lot of different moving pieces. If you're trying to make an aggressive offer and the lender is completely on board, don't pick a date without talking to the lender. Things like holidays, weekends can push back a loan closing. So discuss with them, discuss with your client, put that in here. And then when I do like to be aggressive, it's a lender I've worked with. I know that my buyer is very, very qualified. The tendency to do this more with VA loans than others. You can shorten this to 5 days. It just gives you that 5-day built-in extension, to be clear, without needing an addendum. But there's only 2 reasons that they could be pushed out. It's not because, say, the buyer's going on vacation or is out of town or has plans or whatever. It's only due to issues resulting from a title issue or from an issue stemming from the loan itself. So you want to be very clear that you're having the discussion with the lender before picking that closing date. Initials. Deed and title. This is where you list other things that would be disclosed in the MLS. If it's a bank-owned property, estate sale is one we see an awful lot around here. Foreclosures, etc. Initials. Desiring a survey. There's different schools of thought about this. I strongly believe that if a buyer is interested in doing some major alterations to the backyard and there's not a fence, you're going to want to have your client go ahead and order and have the appraisal done during the transaction. Specifically, I've seen this where if you know that they want a pool, you want to actually add an additional contingency for, say, anywhere from 14 to 21 days to get the survey done. You need to find out if there are any kind of utilities going on that might affect where your clients can put a pool. If it's a condo, obviously, there's no need for a survey. If it's a townhouse, for the most part, that fence line is the property line. But I'm seeing a lot specifically out in Suffolk of new townhouses that are going in and don't actually have a fence yet. That's where we want to jump in and see if we can contact the condo association or homeowners association, even though we haven't gotten those documents, to see what we can do to find out about that property line. If they're going to allow you to put up a fence, as a buyer, you're going to want to know exactly how far back you can go. But that about covers that. I would say for most single family homes, if there already is a fence and you're not planning on doing any major alterations to your yard or your fence line, I wouldn't worry about it. But if somebody does choose to order a survey after it has the transaction has closed, I'm finding that what's coming back is that that's actually a bit more expensive than if you have the title company go ahead and order it as soon as you get ratified. Coming up here to prorations and escrow, 99.9% of the time here, we are marking A for any kind of financing or cash sale. We're not really doing assumptions coming out of this firm, so we can leave that right where it is with A. For your financing contingency here, so this right here, this line where it says C note, is where you're going to put in that purchase price. As you negotiate on the price back and forth, you want to make sure that you're changing that here as well. Coming down for conventional financing, again, if an appraisal comes back low, it does reopen a negotiation period where you have 3 days to negotiate whether or not a buyer comes up or a seller comes down. Hang on 1 second. My apologies. Sorry about that. Okay. Where were we? With cash, a lot of times cash buyers, specifically investors, are not all that interested in paying for and ordering an appraisal. But sometimes they are if they're thinking about taking money out from the value of the home immediately. That is completely their option. For property condition, I love the verbiage here. We are not home inspectors, so we don't want to address anything that would fall under what we intend for our home inspector to take a look at. This is more for, say, you see a vacant home, but there's still property left in it. That's where I like to make sure in this section, hey, this needs to be removed. Also, say you're going through a home and you see all the screens are in really, really bad, condition. You can go ahead and mark that in here. Yeah, the home inspector is probably also going to ding it, but sometimes people are perfectly fine with the screens being in bad condition. If your buyer noticed something like that, if you can see something latent with your eyes, you can put it in this section. But for the most part, if you're not sure if something is working or not, definitely wait for the home inspector. The section here about whether or not the buyer has inspected the property in person. If your marking has not, and this is for any and all type of video walkthrough that might have been done or videos that they've seen, if they're buying it sight unseen, if they are not physically in the property, including if they have sent a family member, but the actual buyer whose name is going on this property, that is considered has not physically inspected the property. And then we're going to add the no physical inspection addendum, just one additional page. For the inspection, repairs, and treatment cap, this covers 4 separate items that we're going to go through. If you leave this blank, the amount that we're asking the seller to be responsible for is 1% of the purchase price. If you are in a very competitive situation And we're talking about a condo, we're talking about a townhouse where you can, as a buyer's agent, kind of take a look at the outside, look for appraisal items that might be hit. If it's in great condition, if it's fairly new, especially, and you want to be competitive, you can knock this down. I was seeing that in, 2020 to 2022, not as much recently, but it being knocked down to 0.5 or even 0.25. I found that that was helpful when a seller's agent is running a net sheet for their clients. So does cover 4 items that we're going to go into: the appraisal and required repairs. So appraiser comes through and they do notice some items that must be fixed before the loan gets cleared to close. We're hoping that the seller will do it. And this is where on paper, we have them held to a certain amount. Again, if you're putting up 1 up here, that covers that, the 1%. It covers your moisture and termite, any necessary repairs. Obviously, we're hoping that falls below the 1% amount. You can negotiate that otherwise. But here's where we're going to mark for the traditionally, I don't want to say across the board all the time, but buyer picks the company and buyer pays for the expense of the inspection. I always prep my sellers to be prepared to pay for it anyway, right? These days it's coming out to about $110. And again, that is just for the moisture and termite inspection. And then the cost of anything that comes back would fall under that cap. Good idea to add any additional items that you can see from the property that might be affected. If you have a shed that you know that your client is going to use at a serious rate and you want to, or a storage unit, detached garage, any of these things, it has to be listed on here to be covered. If you haven't listed it and that you come back to the seller and say, well, there was an issue with that, that can lead to either more negotiations or farther issues down the line. Seller might want to say, no, I'm not doing that. You didn't put in here that you were going to inspect that. So for this line around here, the reports that have to be obtained and delivered to the title company, this is no joke, make it match the PICRA. Don't forget to do this. I've seen a few agents that I've dealt with on the other side that have forgotten until we're maybe 2 weeks out, and then it's rush to get that inspection done. Just have it done, book it. If you're the agent that's booking the home inspection, go ahead and book the moisture and termite, so they're done at the same time. I usually fill in this amount if the one side doesn't do it and the other side must, and they want to push the cost back. About 110 is what we're seeing across the board these days. Treatment, this is where it talks about that cost falling under the cap, and repairs. Typically, we're seeing repairs more so in a property that does have a crawl space. So just prepare your buyers that a crawl space can breed problems, and we're going to find out what's going on under there. Hopefully the sellers have had a company, service company contract to come out either every 3 months or every year to take a look at what's going on there. Always recommend that to your clients. All right, whether or not we have well water or city water is going to be covered here, whether or not your clients would like to have a test confirming that the water is safe. And mark here, buyer or seller's expense. Same thing here for septic. We're going to ask that the seller obtain prior to the walkthrough inspection at the buyer's expense a written statement addressed to buyer from septic system inspector or someone with a valid on-site sewage system operator, licensed, and a soil evaluation as well if we're dealing with well. Whether or not includes pumping the system, you're going to ask the listing agent for any and all documentation, not word of mouth, that says a schedule of when the septic system has been pumped. Also covers the walkthrough inspection. It's important that we have this cap to cover that. There have been situations, especially if the home is vacant, that you can run into issues with the house having been vacant for a month, for 2 months, however long. Can also run into situations here where the sellers have already turned off the utilities and you go to do the walkthrough inspection. And for example, if the refrigerator has been turned off, and the water to it hasn't been turned off as well, you can end up with water all over the floor, literally just seeps out of the indoor iced and water dispenser. This is also just a second thing to bring up. Another reason why it's a really good idea to either do your walkthrough inspection not the day before, but perhaps 48 hours before, or schedule what I like to do is 2 walkthroughs. Yes, it's time consuming, but absolutely worth it to do one 3 days out and then do one the day before or the day of, just to make sure everything's covered. We want to give the seller an opportunity to fix something that arose through the walkthrough inspection, but had not arisen previously, like water on the floor, like a plumbing issue because the home has been vacant, things like that. Typically, we're asking for the seller to be responsible for providing all utilities required. The only time I've seen this any other way where the buyer's responsible for that is where it's a foreclosure or a short sale. The sellers have already turned off the utilities, typically by the time the home has come on the market. But a buyer who's buying a property like that, hopefully you have prepared them, and that's definitely a conversation for a deeper dive. So again, for the most part, 99.9% of the time, we're marking here seller to be responsible for providing. Another thing to keep in mind is that if a transaction closing date does get pushed back, have that conversation with the listing agent. Remind them that if the seller has already scheduled to have the utilities turned off, they need to call the utility company and extend that timeline. I usually prep my sellers to do it anywhere from 3 to 5 days after closing. The buyers are going to call, and we're going to be on the buyers on the buy side to call the utility companies so that the day of closing, everything is in their name, and the sellers will get a check retroactively from the utility companies. We're talking a couple of dollars, but that's usually why people like to do it on day of. Better for all parties if you have the sellers wait a couple extra days in case the closing does get pushed back. I know that I'm going kind of quickly. Does anybody have any questions for me? All right. We're going to come down here to contingencies. These term contingency is a time period in which parties can walk away, and it's not considered breach of contract. To get more into that, the community interest community disclosure, otherwise known as the CIC, this is where we're disclosing as a buyer, you have found out, but the information was in the listing, whether or not it is a condo, whether or not it is a condo consisting of three or fewer units, because that's different, or whether or not we have a POA or an HOA. We're going to fill in that information here. Always call and confirm. If you're digging and you don't see accurate information on the MLS, I hate to say that it happens, but it does. What I have done is fished around in other properties in that neighborhood that have closed to find out more information, the right information of the homeowners association. I'm recommending you do that more and more. Don't just take for granted what is actually listed on the MLS. There's quite a few that have both a condo fee and a POA or an HOA. And we don't want to get into a situation where we're halfway through and we've only gotten one set of documents and we need them from both. So do your due diligence as the buyer's agent, confirm with the listing agent. If you can't, dig around in the neighborhood or even go into the history of the property and then call and confirm with the association. Takes a little bit of extra time, but worth it to get in front of it. All right. So why this is a contingency? Because the buyer may cancel within 3 days of receiving the documents from the condo association or the homeowners associations. The way that I explain that to my buyer, why this is a contingency, is because what is in those documents for the condo association bylaws is really the one thing that can't be negotiated by a real estate agent. We have nothing to do with it. We can't make any changes. If a buyer is not happy with the 4 colors that the condo association says that they can paint the front doors, if it's a strong enough reason for them to walk away, they do have the ability to. Again, we can't negotiate anything that's in there. Side note, when we receive those condo documents, I do tell my clients, I'm not reading that whole thing. It's 300 to 400 pages long. We ask for an electronic copy. It's 3 days. It's a lot of documents to read through, but it is chaptered. So have them read through, find out anything that's important to them. What you're looking for is the resale document, needs to go to the lender, needs to go to the title company. But you're also looking, very important, for the violations page. When the property goes under contract, the listing agent puts in a request for these documents to be emailed, and that triggers the condo association or the homeowners association to do an inspection of the property. They are only doing an inspection of the outside of the property, but things that have a tendency to come back as a violation is improper lighting, improper sheds, fence work that needs to be done, siding that needs to be fixed, or more importantly, what I see a lot is just they want that home power washed. And we want to make sure that the seller does this. The seller has enough time to do this. Hopefully they've taken a look around the property ahead of time, but sometimes properties do come to market that need some things done. I will go ahead once we receive the violations page and put forth a document listing. We're going to copy them on the violations page, but also listing what the repairs are that need to be done and ask for a second inspection by the homeowners association or condo association. Not all of them will come out and immediately do one. They say that they do one within a month, but just a heads up. So and just so you know, when you receive, the day that you receive the condo association or homeowner association docs, that's actually day 0. Day 1 starts at midnight. So it's a little bit of extra time in there. Just don't fall into a hole where your clients say, I don't have time to read this. Can you read this and summarize this for me? Absolutely not. That is not what we do. If we did that, we'd be reading a lot of condo documents more than we'd be doing any of the other paperwork required. All right. Oh, I apologize. We've got chat. Ooh, dryer vent cleaning. Stacy brought up. I don't.
Yes, my
Yep.
condo, I just closed. They called it on compliance and on the resale cert, right? And
Mm.
so we the home had been vacant for about 6 months, and my
Mhm.
buyers are the ones that picked it up because I missed that where they called it out, and they said, "Why are we paying to clean their old crap?" And
Oh,
I was
wow.
like, "You're right." And so I went back to the other agent, and yeah, I mean, her sellers weren't happy because they called that we had to do a paid receipt to send to them within 30 days of closing to show it had been cleaned.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we literally made sure that that seller was doing that because that was his responsibility. And
Sure.
so, yep, we got it all done. And but yeah, that was a $200 cleaning for the seller.
Oh, that's actually not bad. I've seen it cost a lot more than that, especially if there's backed up issues. Um,
Right,
but
right.
yeah,
But yeah, no, if my buyer would have overlooked that, right, it would have been their responsibility after close. And guess who I would have been getting a phone call. So,
yes, absolutely.
but
Absolutely. I have
yep.
had buyers kind of catch things before I've had a chance to, which is great. And one of the things I'm seeing with certain condos in Virginia Beach is that dryer vent cleaning is actually becoming mandatory by the condo association. Like they're actually saying they do it. They've raised the condo fee to cover it, but they're coming out once a year to do it. So it's always good knowing that before you close, whether or not it's a situation like that, but having one that needs to be done and hasn't been done in a long time is such a major fire hazard.
Right, and I think by rule and law that if the buyer does not ask for that to be done by the seller, it's an assumed responsibility of the new ownership.
Yep,
That's why we have the 3-day rule, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great because they can turn over a receipt that they had it cleaned, 2 months ago. It's almost impossible for us to tell just with
Exactly.
our bare eyes. But I do try to look outside and at least find the dryer vent. And that's something that if I can't, I'm definitely asking the inspector to, as well as to take a picture of it, because I'm sure, just like you, Stacy, we've seen our share of birds' nests in a dryer vent. And
After closing, a client saying one was in their microwave vent, so whatever.
oh
Oops.
my God.
Yep, another story.
Yep. Plenty of
You're
them in
doing
the
great.
chimney, but that's also another story. Oh, it
Yeah.
seems to always be birds in the chimney. All right. So we are at property inspections. The buyer decides whether or not they want a home inspection. Being that Virginia is a buyer beware state, I can't stress how important it is that they have a home inspection done, even if it's a new build. And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of talking about new build home inspections because that's different and the contract would look different. But there really isn't anymore a reason to waive a home inspection. Yes, when we were deep in a different kind of seller's market during COVID, people were waiving home inspections left and right. I did have clients that actually lost properties because I would not allow them to waive completely a home inspection. The only time I've said absolutely okay to that is obviously when I'm working with an investor. It's a cash sale. It's a de-stressed property. Half the time it doesn't even have working AC. That's fine. That's a totally different story. If it's a property that's within, say, 10 to 12 years old, and my clients are interested in doing the home inspection for informational purposes only, I will let them, with the caveat of, if anything that comes back that's health and safety related, they have the option to walk away. I look at it almost as a pass-fail situation when we're doing it for informational purposes only. But there's nothing that says that we can't open up a conversation with the listing side to say, hey, look, I know that we said that we were going to do this for informational purposes only, but this is something that's really kind of major that needs to be done before you sell the house to anybody. And I have never had any pushback from the other side. Typically, it's because they took our offer because we were doing the home inspection for informational purposes only, but the sellers were still ready to do what needed to be done to get the deal closed, to get the house sold. Coming down to insulation, EIFS, this is your stucco properties. Again, we don't see them as much around here. If you do, the more inland you go, you'll see more. I'm finding that the cost for this has gone up to do an inspection, and the cost of the inspection does fall on the buyer. Again, Virginia buyer beware. So that is going to, it used to be down closer to 1,800. I'm seeing it now up to about 2,200. We don't want to give them an exact number. We need to find the best bet here is find 3 companies, put that information in front of the buyer. If they're even interested in going to look at a property that is built like this, explaining to them that we have this done because if there is any way that moisture can get in below that, it can cause an incredibly major problem and out a lot of money. So let's get in front of it. Let's get that inspection done. But yeah, that's a pretty small percentage I'm finding in our area. Lead-based paint, if the property was built prior to 78. The truth of the matter is we are having all of our buyers sign the lead paint disclosure before we're looking at property. Doesn't matter the age, but have that conversation with them. We get people who say, oh, I want an older house. Well, let's talk about what comes along with an older house and some issues that you'll have to deal with as a buyer. I wouldn't call them problems, but just here's what you need to know. And this is a big part of the discussion. A lot of people think they can quote unquote see lead-based paint. You really can't. And the truth is it's probably underneath wallpaper. It's underneath paint. It's definitely covered. The big issue with it is that when you go to do any kind of construction, you want to tear down a wall, you want to put built-ins in, it can become a major hazard. We don't want kids or animals licking the walls where we know lead paint is. So have that conversation, especially as part of your buyer broker before anyone who comes to you and says, I want to buy an older home. Other contingencies, the great things about the state of Virginia is that we can kind of make up whatever contingencies we really need to be able to protect our client. So obviously, if it's contingent upon the sale of the buyer's home, we must disclose that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You don't disclose that, you can have such an incredible domino effect affecting other people's purchases. Get in front of it, make sure that the seller knows the situation. I like to have the buyer's property on the market for at least a day and hopefully under contract as well, but at least on the market before making an offer, because along with this offer on their next property, hopefully, I'm going to include that MLS listing with the beautiful pictures. This is a desirable home. It's priced correctly, and hopefully that will make our offer more attractive. I have had listing agents hold my buyer's offer until we've actually gone under contract on the buyer's home that they're selling. That's fine. It's a lot of juggling of timelines, but we can absolutely make that work. Subject to buyer obtaining acceptable pricing for flood insurance. This is more and more important as things change with flooding. But when you're looking at properties, and it seems like where your buyer is interested is going to involve flood insurance, go ahead and get those conversations going between your insurance agent and the buyer to get as much information done as soon as possible so that they know, especially it's just best to get it done within that first 7 days. You're already even in a home inspection contingency. You can write this for the same amount of time. And any good insurance agent will be able to give them a breakdown of their costs beforehand. And then also we're going to have the contingencies for bankruptcy, divorce, and probate here. Initials. Hang on one sec. Final orders to area. Oh, that's a great one, Stacy. We can do additional contingency for military moves. Huh, I like that a lot. I'm going to add that to what I do. All right. So items to convey. It doesn't always occur to us when we're in a property with a client to actually take notes what's there. So it's better to do it. Take your clipboard with you, make notes while you're there, or have that MLS printed with you, because I have seen mistakes made here, gas range versus electric range, whether or not there's a microwave. There's a ton of houses out there that don't have a built-in microwave. Number of refrigerators. If your clients are super jazzed that there is a refrigerator in the garage or a deep freezer, in addition to what's in the kitchen, if you don't ask for it here, the sellers have absolutely no reason to leave it for you. They can if they want to, but they don't have to. So make sure you're asking for absolutely everything that they want. Make sure in the listing it says, you know, washer, dryer, convey, or are listed in the MLS. If it just says washer, dryer, hookup, chances are that they're not leaving them. Again, worth a phone call to clarify with the listing agent. Check under the sink for the garbage disposal. I would say my first 2 years, I did have a few clients who moved in, thought they were getting a garbage disposal, and there was not one there. That cost me, back then it was only about $150. I think it's closer to $275 at this point. So just make sure it's there if it's an issue for your clients. As far as blinds, curtains, and hardware, because so many are built custom to that property or bought custom to that property, I'm always going to ask for blinds. I'm not necessarily always going to ask for curtains or drapes unless there's something that are just, you know, really fabulous. Buyer's totally in love with it. But I do find that more sellers take the drapes and curtains and not the blinds. And you also want to ask for the hardware, because it's terrible to come in to a walkthrough and see the blinds are on the floor and they have pulled out all the hardware and now you have holes. So just make sure that they are checked here. And if they have removed any hardware, that becomes a walkthrough item that they need to fix. They now need to patch or place the hardware back on the wall. Get ahead of it by having it marked correctly here. You can do all for smoke alarms, but it's much smarter to actually count the ones that are in the home. Make sure that's enough. Your clients are happy with that. I am seeing in some older homes, specifically in Norfolk and Chesapeake, that we're seeing one smoke alarm. That's definitely not enough for a 2-story home. So talk to your clients, see what they're comfortable with. Those with kids, some of them are asking for smoke alarms in every single room. Have the conversation with them about, do you want to add that yourself? These days, some of them are, you can control from your phone. They're part of like an ADT system, or if they want the sellers to put in. Also, homes that have been, for lack of a better word, flipped or renovated, I'm finding that they're not reinstalling smoke detectors. Go ahead and ask for it. Or have that conversation with the listing agent, because the home inspector is going to ding that on a property that's been flipped. Count your ceiling fans. And it's not a bad idea to make sure, if you don't see ceiling fan photos in the listing, take pictures of them the day that you're doing your first showing. If you're surprised by ceiling fans that are in there, you want to make sure that they're not actually swapping out really nice ceiling fans, if that's what your buyers love, for super cheap ones. Don't really see that done a whole lot anymore, but they could. Pool cover, pool equipment, get into detail, find out what's there, dig through it. I find that, typically there's a nice, neat, organized shed. That is the hope. That has all of the equipment that you're looking for. And then you can also have a separate pool inspection, and you can add that as a contingency as well. Your home inspectors are not your pool inspectors. Reach out to agents for a list of who we use. For the fireplace, again, see what's there, mark what's necessary. And your trash, I think the price has gone up. It's like $125 per container. If it's not there, make sure that they're leaving them. Fuel in the tank as well. Garage door openers and remotes, 9 times out of 10, they're missing, especially if the home has been a rental. Have that conversation with your client ahead of time. Do they want to purchase their own, a new kit, a new system, a new garage door opener? What are their plans for the garage? But any and all that are there, definitely mark here. Other items to convey that add no additional value to the property. If they're in the listing, it says furniture to convey or anything in the house to convey. Even though it says it in the listing, make sure that you've added it here. All right, brokerage relationship. Oh. Where are we here? On propane, fuel, or oil, be sure the seller understands if they're being reimbursed or what their conveys. Oh, interesting. 3 of your sellers have paid almost $800 in fuel conveyance. Huh. So would you say 9 times out of 10, Stacy, are they being reimbursed?
No, my sellers, my last 3 sales in the past 6 months on propane, buried rented tanks. We've conveyed the fuel, and of course, they're longtime owners, so they're on auto, refills, right?
Okay.
And then all of a sudden, it's like, right before close, they're getting half a fill. And so because we agreed in the contract that it would, when we listed, it would convey. Yeah, next thing you know, my sellers are stuck giving the new buyers, almost a 3/4 tank, full tank of fuel free, right?
So how would you recommend the conversation go so that they're not
Well,
being?
just to make sure your seller understands when I say, "Are you gonna ask for reimbursement? You want a reading? Because the
Mhm.
buyers on rented tanks, if they don't take over that tank immediately and put a rental agreement in place, they're the company, hey, so they've gotta make an agreement with this rental company. Either they're gonna continue on and keep the fuel in the tank, or the rental company will come release it, and they now need to get a new propane company to do their business.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's important because that's an additional, like, my seller, my sellers were prepared, obviously, they understood, but I'm saying other people may not if they don't understand. And
Absolutely.
when you're representing your buyer, and also as representing your seller when you see this in your offer or when you're listing,
When you're
what's
listing.
your
Yeah,
purpose? What's your purpose?
that's the conversation that I was curious about, is that, but I like how you explained it, to just kind of get ahead of it and know the schedule for when they're coming out. And then when you would have sellers ask for reimbursement.
You can. You can
Can
literally the seller can go on ahead and give up their contract. I mean, their end of their contract is the day that they end it, say, "We no longer do business with you because we sold." They can
Okay.
literally, say, "I wanna get all my fuel back, get a credit, get the tank out," you know? A seller has that right.
I haven't had to deal with that yet, so that's interesting. I've got a lot of questions for you, but I'll do that another time.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, this is part of when we're neg it could come
Negotiate.
up when you talk about items to convey, but again, that goes with your original seller conversation.
Okay, awesome.
Just odd things I always run into, of course,
No,
whatever.
this is great because you're like on the other side of the world from me and deal with things that I never have to deal with. That's why
Call
I
me,
call
girl.
you.
All right, thanks.
So for the moving on to the brokerage relationship, when both sides are being represented by their own firms, we're going to mark 2. This is obviously the most common. Do other ones fall into play? Yes, but we're not typically involved in those. We do have deals where one of the sides is unrepresented, and we work out a separate compensation situation for that. I'm not going to get into all of that now. We don't do dual representation in our office. We have done designated representation. And in case you have questions about what that means, say that you have a listing, but then you also know of buyers who are, but you don't have a signed agreement with them. They come along, they're interested in making an offer on the listing. We are going to hand them to another agent in the office. A lot of benefit to that, but the important thing is that those agents do not talk. They don't work together on the deal except for negotiating for their client's best interests. And there is a disclosure that they have to sign that states that. Coming down to ACUS. So it'll be listed in the MLS, the ACUS noise zone. So when you see those numbers ranging from -65 to 75 plus, I have actually seen it recently listed incorrectly. I'm not exactly sure what's going on or if there were any changes, but I double checks with the tax records. I will also, if I think that it's wrong, it's specifically around like Dam Neck, I'm seeing that they're listed wrong. Go into the neighborhood, take a look at the previous listings, just double check all around. Sometimes when that agent maybe had a TC put the documents together, they looked at something wrong. So double check with that, and then whether or not you're in an accident potential crash zone will also be listed. And one additional disclosure that goes along with that. Coming down to disclosing any and all relationships, either by blood or marriage. If you even question, should I, then go ahead and disclose. Hang on a sec here. Lucy, there are ACUS maps for all the cities and the city websites. Perfect. Okay. We were talking about disclosing any and all relationships. If you're not sure if it's your uncle's cousin, it's just always better to disclose. No harm in disclosing. There is harm in not disclosing. Initials. And then we come down to our brokerage fee. We are only checking one. This is where we negotiate our compensation that the seller will pay. This is where we fill it in. Don't make it complicated. Have the conversation during your buyer brokerage conversation before you're taking anyone to view a property. This is my fee. I can try to get it from the seller's side, but that is not a guarantee. So buyer, I need you to understand that if they cannot, we're going to have you, but this is facing towards the listing side only. So you've already had that conversation. And you're going to put in, you're asking for 3%, you're asking for 2.5. You can do your due diligence beforehand and reaching out to the listing agent and asking if they will tell you what the seller is offering. I am finding a lot of people are being very upfront about that number. There is also the school of thought, I know that a lot of agents have here, of not saying and just saying that is negotiable, put in what you're asking for. So aim high, you can always negotiate. Stacy, you have a question?
I do. So, my first time now coming in, with these new rules and all this, an unrepresented buyer. So I have an active listing, met the buyer on Saturday, had him sign an unrepresented party. All of a sudden, he's showing great interest. Yesterday, I filled in all the seller buy. He said he wanted to write an offer. Sent in all the details. He was understanding. He's representing himself, no other agent involved. So when I sent him the contract, this is what I wrote, and see if that was right on the purchase agreement under brokerage fee right here. So I struck through the amount where it says percentage or below the sum of, and to the right I wrote per the SAER agreement between seller and listing firm, the unrepresented buyer fee schedule will apply.
I think that sounds right, but Lucy is right here, so I'm going to take advantage of that. Lucy, does that sound correct to you? I'm not sure if she's
way more
doing something.
complicated than they need to be.
Oh,
If in your SAER, it says for an unrepresented buyer, you get an additional 1%,
That's
then
correct.
you should have just put 1% in that spot.
Okay. Easy enough then. Okay, that was a ultimately
It's not wrong. It's not wrong. It's not going to get kicked back. It's just more complicated than it needs to be.
I wasn't sure how to figure it out when I was trying to get it over last night. And I was like, well, let me like fall to the one that I knew would cover me, you know?
Right. Yep.
Okay,
Yes. So
perfect.
that's why we tell you to put that in your SAER, because when it happens, you want to be prepared.
Yep, yep. I've been copying and pasting all your stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
I like the answer. Let's keep it simple. All right. Any other questions pertaining to this brokerage fee section? Okay. I just, for the record, I really like how our contract states this. I've actually had agents from other regions and other states like send me what they have to do, and they really have to jump through some legal verbiage cycles to put this across, and it doesn't become very friendly to the consumer or the client to be able to read. This is pretty to the point, and this follows up how pretty to the point it is in our buyer brokerage agreement as well. So I like the fact that that is short and sweet. All right, we are coming to other provisions. This can be a multitude of things. This is a great place to put that home warranty request. Definitely put down who will be ordering it. It should pretty much always be the buyer's agent. Don't wait till the end, just get that done. Super easy. If you're on the listing side, hopefully you've got a home warranty, seller's home warranty on the property. Easy enough. Seller agrees to resolve any and all association violations prior to closing and provide a clearance letter from the association. I have been starting to put this down. I've received pushback, but I'm happy I received pushback because it's drawing more attention to violations. Because if not everybody's paying attention, you don't want to end up with a situation like the dryer vent. Providing a clearance letter from the association. I am getting pushback as well from the association, so I'm calling them, not just going on the word of the listing agent who says they don't do another inspection. Make sure that any and all work that was done pertaining to violations, that you have some type of invoice. The only time that you're really not going to if it's a simple like light bulb situation, but that's something you can see with your own eyes when you do walkthrough. I will always take the opportunity if I hear from the seller's agent that the violations have been addressed. If the home is vacant, I ask if I can go back and check with my own eyes. And I take pictures of that just to make sure all bases are covered. Because again, they're not all doing an additional inspection to get a clearance letter. But what most associations are telling me is that from the time those condo documents were issued, they'll do one in 30 days. So if you know that that falls within the time window of your closing, great. If not, get your eyes on it. Initials. I think that as far as changes, those are the big items. Obviously, coming down to the agreement to conduct transactions using digital signatures for electronic signatures. We need both parties to sign that digital signatures are acceptable for use in this transaction. If both buyer and seller do not initial below, digital signatures are not acceptable for use in this transaction. So where I hit a wall with this sometimes is with elderly people who, specifically if it's two people on the title that are selling and or buying, and they don't have different email addresses. I have been able to convince people to open up just a simple Gmail account to deal with that. But if you don't have them both signing by electronically, you're making basically everybody run and get wet signatures. So get in front of this before either a property comes to market or before you're making any offers. Initialing does not mandate the use of digital signatures, but allows. This is important because, again, say you're on one side and you do have somebody without an email address. You don't want to hold everybody else accountable for having to get wet signatures. Signatures, and I think everything on the last page here is the same. As a buyer's agent, just take an extra minute to make sure that this is all filled out properly. when I'm on the listing side, a lot of times I get this and none of this has been filled out. It's not a big deal. It's just not a good look. So we like to come across as having crossed our T's and dotted our I's. I didn't realize how long-winded I was. I apologize. Does anybody have any questions I can help you with? All right. Well, thanks for being here, and I hope you all have a great weekend. I'm going to go ahead and end this.